Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar series on urban rodent control. Before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping rules. Please, everyone, mute your line. You can use the chat box to ask any questions, and we'll be answering all the questions at the end of the webinar. For any additional questions not answered during the webinar, you can email them to us at education@nola.gov, and we will be posting this webinar on our YouTube channel. Today's topic is rodent proofing and home inspections. It'll be a comprehensive look at the strategies for building rodents out of your residence. Today we have speaking with us Dr. Claudia Rigo and Timmy Medire. Claudia Rigo is the director of Mosquito, Termite, and Rodent Control Board. She earned her degrees from Purdue University, the University of Georgia, and obtained a PhD from the University of Florida. In 2004, she became principal research entomologist for the City of New Orleans Mosquito and Termite Control Board. In 2006, she became assistant director, and in 2010, she was promoted to the director of the department. Timmy Medire has been working in the field of urban rodent control for 20 plus years. In college, he drove fog trucks at night in his hometown of LaPlace, Louisiana. In 2008, he began working at the City of New Orleans Mosquito, Termite, and Rodent Control Board as a general pest specialist and is working as a special projects coordinator also. His primary focus is on commensal rodents and urban rodent control. Timmy has been a featured speaker since 2015 for PCT's annual report on rodent control. Timmy has a BA in history from UNO. And now, Dr. Rigo.
Thank you so much, Astacia. Hello, everybody. Thank you again for joining us for part 3 of 4, talking about rodent control and all these aspects of biology and control, of course, of rodents. All right, so just a little bit about ourselves for the folks that do not know, but we've been around for a long time, since 1964. You can see a picture of our building here in New Orleans. And we do a lot of different things. Mosquito control, of course, all of Orleans Parish, but we also do rodent control on private and public properties. And then we also have an education program. We work with termites and do a lot of different things. So I encourage everyone, if you'd like to be on our email list, to send a message to education@nola.gov, and we'll be sure to get you notified on when we have training opportunities. But today we're going to focus on rodent proofing and home inspections, right? So this is one of the most important things when we think about rodent control, right? Is really to focus on the property and how do you build these animals out, prevent them from coming in, and really doing good inspections of that property as well as the land, right? The yard that may be around it that potentially could be causing some issues. So I'm going to show you a little video here. This is actually from a city building from some years ago, but you can see there's a roof rat and it had gotten into the building. It was open, some issues. Actually, there was some vegetation that was along the outside of the building, and the animals simply climbed up and went in. And you can see that it's actually pulling on the wires and stripping wires behind it. You can see possibly for some bedding material, but it's, these animals can be responsible pretty high percentage of sort of identified reasons for fires, right? So you can see this is a great example. I'm going to go ahead and just show that video one more time because it is super cool. But there it is. It's going to chew on some wires. It's going to pull on those wires. And so again, another very important reason to keep that property sealed up, closed, and not allow these animals to come in the first place. So there it is, yanking on that wire. All right. So, what are we trying to do here today, right? Because it could be pretty daunting when you walk up to a property and say, okay, I need to close every single hole, 1/4 of an inch. We're going to talk about this. But what we're trying to do here today is give our residents, as well as our pest management professionals, our environmental health workers, some very practical advice, right? To how to do these inspections, how to do some repairs, often using off-the-shelf products, and some of these preventative measures that anyone can take, especially when you're looking in those yards, right? This is not going to cover pest proofing for all insects. I mean, that's just a whole nother can of worms, right? But today we're really going to focus on rodents, and we're also going to focus on areas that these animals most frequently gain entrance to the structures, right? So there's so many examples depending on the type of construction you have, what are your pests. But for today, we're going to just give some examples. And so I think it's super important that people really should place that emphasis on pest proofing their homes, right? Their homes, the work building. Many of the issues, honestly, would be eliminated if we do that. So we're not anti-pesticides. We use pesticides here. I think it's about pesticide stewardship, but you really need to look at property in a holistic approach, right? So you're looking at not only using pesticides, but can I do other work by closing holes so they don't gain access to inside food, et cetera. So that's what we're going to talk about. And to be honest, a lot of the homeowners, a lot of our pest management professionals, they overlook that, right? And so they're going to default to trapping all the time or possibly using baiting programs. Those are going to be the first choice. But I am glad to see that there are companies out there that all they do is pest proofing, right? So very, very important to include that in your management program. And then the other thing that we have found is that a lot of times people think that it's so time consuming, so costly. You need special expertise. Yes, in some examples you do. But there are a lot of things we're going to show you today that anyone can do. You can go to your big box store, buy some materials, and close up those openings. Okay, so it's not as scary as it seems. Now, the other thing is you need to really think about how these animals are getting into your property, right? Boxes are a commonplace where mice and in some case rats would be delivered to inside of especially a commercial property, right? So we all have boxes that are arriving on your doorstep, and then imagine a commercial property like something like us, right? We have boxes coming in every single day from things that have been purchased. So it is not unusual, right, for a mouse or something, a rodent, or even a cockroach, for example, to be delivered into that facility. So when we're thinking about pest proofing, possibly coming up with a way of looking at how you receive the delivery. And so another thing we see, there's a lot of construction that goes on. We often see in some new construction that we have mice, for example, that have moved in. So there's lots of different ways these animals are going to seize any of those opportunities, open doors, open vents. It's a beautiful day, for example, you pop open the back door and you're just providing these animals an opportunity to come in. There may be heat that is being lost. You may have food odors that are escaping. So all these different things potentially that could be attracting these animals to go in. And so again, they're very good, right, at basically, as long as their skull can get through, the rest of their body is going to go through. So they're constantly, shifting sort of their shape, not their shape, but, they have the ability to move, twist, and get in. They also have a lot of tactile and sensory organs. They're vibrissae, right? So that they really understand they're constantly probing an area to see if they're going to be able to get in. So it's pretty important. So anytime I go to a building or we go to a building here in our facility, the first thing I'm going to do is sort of thinking about that envelope of the building, right? How do you seal that envelope, right? So mice only need about 1/4 of an inch to gain access into a structure. So that's pretty small. It's about the size of a dime. And it's about a half an inch, for example, for rats. And so these are really quite small. So you have to do good inspections, look at that building, where possibly they could be coming in. So they are going to be attracted to these gaps, these holes. We talked about it, right? You may have scents, odors that are coming out, temperature differences, and they're constantly exploring and re-exploring their environment anyway, right? To see where they can gain some resources or gain access. So all of us should frequently inspect our properties, right? It could be commercial property, but it can also be your residential property. So what we like to do from a mosquito standpoint is take 10 minutes every week, right? To take a quick walk around, see where you may have standing water. And the concept here is pretty similar with rodents. You take a walk around your property, look for new openings, perhaps. Maybe there's a void that's new. So those are all important things to do. So if you see vulnerable areas or areas that you know that have rodent activity, you want to get those repairs, those modifications, pretty quickly, right? So we don't want the animals to continue to exploit these areas. So very important. So we talked about this a little bit already, but this is just a little skull here of a Norway rat. And then we also have one of the house mouse. So what we say is it's a quarter is a half an inch, a dime is a quarter inch, and then of course a number 2, a pencil, for example, that might slide into a gap. So those openings need to be smaller, right, than that 35 cents and then that number 2 pencil. So when you are with customers, when you are doing a kitchen inspection, if you're an environmental health worker, a sanitarian, have that in your pocket so that you can show them and say, look, this is the size we're talking about, so that it helps your customer, it helps the person really visualize the size. Think of a big structure, right? Those tiny little holes. It can be very daunting for your customers or that resident to do this. And so, again, not so scary. We just need to give them some techniques. And so as long as that animal can get that skull, their skull through, they're going to wiggle and sort of squeeze through the rest of their body. So again, very important to look at the details and look at those small holes. Now, these animals, their teeth grow continuously, right? That's part of being a rodent. It's one of the 2 sort of characteristic features of being a rodent. And the enamel of a rat's teeth is extremely strong. It's actually stronger than some of our metals, such as copper or aluminum. So very important to know this, because when you are doing pest proofing, you want to stick with those tough metals, very hard metals, such as stainless steel. That's a good one to select. So it's very important for us to understand the biology of this animal, so that when you're making control decisions, when you're making pest proofing decisions on what materials you're going to use, you're going to use the ones that stick, right? The ones that are going to actually work. So the first step that we take, and years ago, it was 2012, and it seems like 10 years, almost 11 years ago, we did a project with the EPA where we took 3 schools. It was one that was over 100 years, a brand new school, and one that had been flooded by Hurricane Katrina. And we looked at the best ways and what options did we have for pest proofing. So the first thing we did was we did an initial inspection. You want to understand how much, right? How big is the issue, both from an infestation standpoint, if you actually have an infestation, is it a rogue animal that had gotten in? So you really need to understand, but you also need to understand how they're entering the building, right? Where they're getting their food and water, very important. And then where's the harborage, right? Where are they sleeping? Where are their nests? So it's very important that you do a very thorough inspection, and that's from attic to basement if you have basements in your area, right? Inside and outside. You really need to do a thorough inspection, because it's very easy to miss that particular area if you don't. And so, again, this happens to be a property, right? They have a property, and next to it, you have, unfortunately, this lot, and it has everything that those animals need, right? So you have to understand what is the root of the problem, and think about it what are the needs of that rodent, which is going to be food, water, right, and shelter. So those are the 3 things that you really need to think about, that sort of pest triangle, right? And how are they getting around? And so what highways, essentially, what pathways are they traveling? So really important. So we try to deprive them, right, of those basic needs. And so you want to stress these animals as best as possible. So if, let's say, somebody has food out, is feeding, they keep their dog food outside, for example, or there may be a tree, a fruit tree, for example, that's providing that food source. We also need to look at water. We're here in Louisiana. There is a lot of water here, right? But is there a leak? A hose bib that is leaking, for example? Is there an air conditioning pan that upstairs in an attic that has water? So you need to really find those water sources so that they can be removed. And also, again, look at the shelter, those boxes in the corner. Is there a pile of stuff that hasn't been moved around? Or there's some cabinets, for example, that have some openings and they have shelter in there. So you need to look at all those things and understand what the root of the problem is. And so throughout the presentation, Timmy's going to be talking about this as well, as you really need to lock in and understand and look for those signs of those animals. So droppings, of course, and tracks could be paw prints, but it also can be those runways that they use, let's say in vegetation, that they're using that path over and over and over. You need to look for gnaw damage and understand if it's a mouse or a rodent based on sort of the size of those gnaw marks. Here in New Orleans, we've got roof rats and Norway rats, right? But some of our roof rats burrow into the ground as well. We've seen that. So it's really understanding and looking for those burrows. Rub marks, again, very good at telling you where these animals are moving, urine stains, and of course, live or dead animals if they're around. So when you think about, we're talking about pest proofing really today, right? But this is a great example of an easy fix. And so if you have garbage bins, with most commercial properties do, you have to make sure that these bins are in good condition. One, the lid has to be closed, right? So it's easy, the lid's there, but it's open. So it's just providing continual access to the food to these animals. But then you also need to make sure that the bins are in good repair. Make sure that the bottom isn't rusted out. Make sure, at the bottom of most of these garbage cans, these dumpsters, there's going to be a place for a plug. Is that closed? Is it open, right? How do these animals gain access? And so again, I really encourage everybody to look at their city code, right? Clearly, this is not acceptable. And so there's a lot of cooperation from our part within departments. So it may be our sanitation department, it may be our state sanitarians, for example, see who has jurisdiction, in that particular area. And then also working with the commercial properties to say, hey, this is not okay. So we actually created some information on some dumpster guidelines, and it's important for everybody to understand their sanitary code locally. I know we have folks outside of Louisiana, outside of New Orleans. So make sure you understand what your codes are and educate folks as best as possible on placement, proper use, how to maintain it. And so these are just a couple of examples. We actually made one as a magnet, and then the other one is a flyer. It can also be found on our social media account. So we can try to get that to as many people as possible, because ultimately, right, you want to remove that food source from these animals. And again, let's look at open garbage cans, right? So you have open garbage cans that are, I call them essentially a feeding trough for these animals. There's a good example here of closed bin, right? So that's preventing that food source from getting to those animals. And so again, for a lot of cities, including ours, we work with other city agencies to really make good strategic decisions about what kind of garbage cans should be used, how often should they be serviced, which is very regularly, right? And you don't want to leave that food source for these animals overnight, or at least accessible. And so here's just another good example where that trail that you see, we had talked about the conducive condition, right? As those signs of where these animals might be. And that is not a human path, that is a rodent path. And so this is a picture from some years ago, but you can see at the bottom, there's a food source, there's harborage within those rocks, and these animals were using this path, getting right to the garbage can, which had food in it. So Very important to remove it. Now, what's really happened in New Orleans, and I think in other cities as well, is that people have gone to the closed garbage cans. And so that is a really great thing for removing that food source from these animals. You have to make sure that you use those garbage cans properly. On the left-hand side, this is before implementation. And I remember this very clearly because it was after Hurricane Katrina. And so this food is just out there, providing that food source, good, healthy food for these animals, high protein, everything else that they need. And of course, they're going to exploit that. On the right-hand side, you can see the closed bins, but we continuously have to work with our vendors to keep those bins clean, right? Because if there might be a lot of food odors on it, and also keep it tight. Again, to keep that food source away from those animals. So this has been really great in New Orleans where it just sort of tells that story. But in 2014, the RTA, the transportation folks, right, started using these at bus and trolley stops, which is great. And then we continued working with the sanitation department to keep putting them out. It is very important to strategically place them, right? So you can see the bottom picture, bottom right, you've got a closed can and an open can. It really does defeat the purpose if you have a closed and an open can right next to each other. So that's where we come in, talking with our sanitation folks and all that, saying, hey, let's put these out where we're having maximum impact on removing those food sources. Now, I want everybody to look at this this picture very carefully, right? So this is all about pest proofing. And so look at those dumpsters. They're perfectly aligned. I believe the last one may not have a lid on it. Two of them actually need to be addressed. But this particular property had some activity with rodents. So we got called out after it had been cleaned up and said, hey, look, everything looks awesome. Think we're in good shape. But if you look closely, look what we see, right? So that's my clip art of a rodent, right? But as soon as I saw that photograph, this is the first thing that I saw was, whoa, wait a second. This is how those animals are getting in, and really have to work with that property to make sure that they're closing up that hole to prevent those animals from coming in. So very important that we all pay a lot of attention to the details. So, I think many of you have heard pest vulnerable areas, right? Those areas that really have everything that your pest needs, but I'm going to call it a rodent vulnerable area, right? Your water sources, each property is different, right? Where that food is, your pipes and your wires, also chases in between walls, right? Those are locations that often will get exploited. Vents going into the building, lots of doors and door frames. We're in an old city here. Well, I just showed you a picture, right, of the door frame that was open. So we need to make sure that that is closed. Thick vegetation too close to structures. That is a bridge. Like the first video that I showed you, that roof rat used the vegetation to climb onto that building and right into their attic, chewing on wires. And what other areas, as you inspect your building, have those harborage locations that would be conducive for these animals? And so we have looked at a lot of different materials, and there's some really wonderful materials out there that we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, but there's also a lot of off-the-shelf materials that can be used. You definitely want to use silicone, right, in a caulk gun, a silicone gun. You want the silicone because it is elastomeric. It doesn't dry and crack. And remember those teeth that I showed you with that very hard enamel? That if you use caulk and it cracks and that animal gets an edge and is able to get its teeth in, it's going to, chew it and it's going to go in. At least with silicone, it moves more, it's more pliable, so it's less likely you're going to get that drying and cracking. Sometimes you do need to use steel or copper mesh. We know we use it all the time. It's usually not just the mesh. It's usually, hey, I'm going to stop the bleeding, basically, right, where these animals are coming in, and then you're going to seal it with either concrete or something over it. Metal screening, your hardware cloth, quarter of an inch or smaller is what you want to use. Some door sweeps, we're going to talk about this. Things that you should have in your vehicle, right? or things that you can go get at the big box store. But staple guns are great, drill guns, hammer, screws and nails. These are all ready mixed concrete, so you don't have to have a whole bunch with you. And it gets hard if the concrete mix gets sort of moist. It's high humidity. So they make small little batches that you mix with water, or it already comes in a pot that you just scoop it out and use it. So those are the types of things that we carry. All right, so remember, a lot of people think this is a huge, daunting thing, right? So where do you start, right? Where do you start with all of this? And I'm going to tell you, the step number one, eliminate the food source, right? It may be food, let's say you're in an office building. It may be food that's in someone's desk, for example, and the food's not in glass or a metal container. So a lot of times people will place those things there. And so again, we really need to make sure that all those food sources and those little hiding spots for these animals are removed. If you happen to feed your pets, and this can be inside or outside, frankly, but especially outside, just make sure that everything is in a good storage container that is going to not be accessible to the animals. And then again, with any kind of pet, you can train them, right? To feed them for a certain period of time and not leave that food out there unattended, because it will be exploited by other animals. For food garbage, for example, you've got to make sure that you place it in the bins with the lid. A lot of these are outside, right? So just make sure that those lids on those garbage bins are closed. So here's just a couple of examples. We took some photographs of different locations of just sort of things that can be done, right? So everyone's looking at this. One, clearly a lot of the clutter needs to be removed. You've got an open garbage can, even in your, in the kitchen. So for me, I don't happen to like putting my garbage bin inside of cabinets. So I actually have a self-enclosed garbage can metal with a lid on it. So I know that no pests are going to have access to the garbage. So those are things that are easily removed. Remove some of that clutter, the cardboard. You can see that's really great for nesting. And then again, anything that's on those counters, really just try to remove all of it. And don't forget about the food scraps, right? So you're looking at ovens and stoves and underneath, things that can be cleaned and removed. So you're not really having those conducive conditions around for these animals. The other thing you want to do is let's say you are in a bit of a hurry, right? But even if you're not, so it is winter now for most of us, but still you want to look at those heat sources, the water heater, the closets, underneath refrigerators, gas stoves, even inside furniture. We see that on a pretty regular basis. Look at those dark areas, those shadows, right behind those appliances and furniture and pantries, underneath sinks. Usually underneath sinks, there's just a lot of stuff. Plus, oftentimes there are openings, right, where those plumbing penetrations come in and out of that building. So make sure that those areas are tight. And we're going to show you a couple examples, but look at those quiet places, those areas that you don't use very often. So clutter, right, provides rodents with the areas for them to nest and also to hoard food. And so they can move food around and they have their little stashes because they do that in their burrow system. So why not above ground in some of these areas that are more quiet and where they may be, nesting in that particular area. So very important to look at that. So the other thing too is not often, they do leave pheromone markers behind. It can be in their urine and their dropping. So it's really important that we do cleaning, right? And now I think after COVID, most everyone has some sort of disinfectant, because I always think about pathogens potentially that they could be leaving in those areas. So really important, right, to break down those proteins and those pheromones, break it down, take it out of there. And also you're removing the potential pathogens in that area. So if we look at this photograph, right, there's a couple of things obviously going on. One, let's just start with the clutter, right? It's got to remove some of that. But we also need to look at plumbing penetrations. It looks like there may have been some leaks as well over time. And so you're looking also for those rub marks, those areas that, again, this is probably very much out of the way. Shove the stuff in the back and who knows when. And it looks like potentially there might even be a pesticide can in there, which is not great, right? So you never want to mix any pesticides, cleaning agents with obviously any kind of containers and all of that. So just make sure that your areas underneath the sinks and cabinets are tidy. You don't have any food scraps. And then all of your plumbing to the outer walls are sealed. So here's just another example too, and you can see where the arrow is showing there's an opening, right? So this is a raised house. There's probably a subfloor somewhere. There may be easy access. These animals potentially can be following those plumbing lines. So, and again, it's wood. So they chew, right, these holes to increase the size as well. So little things that might go overlooked that can be easily sealed and closed. And actually, you can see this here. It looks like there might be some fur there that had caught onto the wood, and it looks like it had also been chewed as well. So again, sometimes you just have to go in and look at those conducive areas where the lines are coming into the house to close those openings to prevent them from coming in. Now, we had talked a little bit about sort of a temporary fix, right? Sometimes we are in a hurry. Sometimes you need specialty equipment that you may need to go find an escutcheon plate or something like that. So yeah, it's okay to do a temporary fix, but these are temporary fixes, right? Which means you actually have to go back and permanently close it because otherwise, you're going to just have this problem again. So pipe shields, we talked about that, are great. Those escutcheon plates, you can use concrete, metal plates, all kinds of things to do a permanent close. So these are, this is actually right after COVID lockdown, right? And especially if you look at sort of the door frames here, many of these have been exploited by rodents. Actually, the one in the upper left-hand side where their arrow is, you can also see a rub mark. So that means these animals have been using it over and over. And you can see that they chewed on the door frame, or on I think actually that's the door, where the animals were going in and out. I cannot stress enough how important it is to have good door sweeps, right, on these doors. And so even though this is an older area, there's no reason why we can't have door sweeps. And actually on the upper right-hand side, you can see there's almost an indentation into the concrete. So those are areas that a door sweep and then also level that concrete will provide a good seal for these animals from getting in and out. Here's just another example at the base of the door that happens to be wood. So they definitely did exploit that as well too, for easy access in and out. And again, this is not the most beautiful thing ever, right? But it totally did the job. And so just having the right tools, sometimes those large scissors to cut metal with some screws on that corner, closed up that opening where those animals were going in and out of this door. So this doesn't cost a lot of money to do. It costs a little bit of time. But again, it's an easy fix and it gets the job done. Now, the place that I think is really a challenge for everyone is the residential and even commercial doors, right? Because the way these doors are set is that they're not going to 100% seal the garages. And they're going to, on the sides, they typically have some sort of opening. And then at the bottom, you need to really look at that concrete as well and make sure that it's level, right? So that you get a good seal. So I want everybody to think about what you have in your garage, right? Most everybody, I think, might have an extra refrigerator or potentially a pantry where they have extra everything in there. Do you keep your pet food in there, your bird seed, right? So just a lot of stuff typically in the garages. So we need to do a good job here. Inspect your garage today, see what you need to do that you can at least improve. Obviously, you need to keep all the food products and everything in bins. Those metal garbage cans work great, right? But those openings will allow warm air to escape. It allows food odors to sort of seep through. So those are all, locations where these animals can exploit. So one of the things we do, not only in garages, but also in attics, is that go during the day, a nice sunny day, and look for the light that's coming in so that you can, address those openings. There are a lot of this is from Dr. Corrigan's book, but there's lots of different kinds of sweeps out there and even some compression seals, right? But honestly, there are some really good products on the market, especially from Excluder. If you have a commercial door, for example, with a dumpster right outside, and that door gets used a million times a day, you have to use good quality products. They're not inexpensive, right? But again, if you're a pest management professional, or let's say you're a school employee and you're in charge of the kitchen, it's worth the money. So you're not getting callbacks, but also you don't want that infestation in that building, from a safety and health and safety standpoint, right? Nobody wants to be written up. Nobody wants to have that kind of, issues in these commercial buildings, or private as well. So I'm going to show you a video. This one should have sound. This is Timmy. I think a couple of years ago, went to a particular property that was being built and was looking at some issues that could easily be fixed. So let's see if the video sound is coming on. Uh-oh, here we go. We don't have the sound. Let's see, let's turn it up all the way.
Obvious hiding spots or entry points for rodents to get in. And they're right in front of us often like this. Here's a dryer duct, right? Now, one of the entry points is going to be around here. Now, that's pretty well flush. It could be better, but still that's not bad. And earlier I'd mentioned the pipes under the houses and putting collars on them and such like that, and putting things around. You could easily do this on this. But really what needs to be done is they need to have a vent cover, which we all see them. They're triangular and they come over like this and cut down, and they have a screen on the bottom. This prevents animals from coming in, because house mice and rats will come in through here, and they will actually enter when this cover is missing and go in here, and they can chew through this like nothing to get access to a house. And think about it like this is blowing out warm air in winter, so the rodents are drawn to that warmth and they go in there. And I've heard about times where people went on vacation and came back and the mice had come in and started nesting in here, and when they went to do laundry, they didn't notice till they smelled the smell, because when it heats up, that mouse urine got very pungent quickly. So this is definitely something to look at, and you're going to have to get that cover for here and secure to make sure it has the grate at the bottom like we said, because this is a serious entry point for rodents in the houses. But let's keep doing our inspection.
Right, so I'll be honest with you, I just recently, this was from my house. And I'm gonna say 2 weeks ago, removed the entire thing, because what happens with your vents, with your dryers, right? That lint accumulates. And this is not the best picture, but that flap actually doesn't close all the way because of that lint that's accumulated in the dryer, in this particular vent. So I actually unscrewed it, removed it entirely from the wall. I washed it, scrubbed it, and now that flap closes properly on my duct of the dryer. So again, a little bit of a pain, right? A little bit of a project, but very, very important to do. And again, here's just another example, right, where this particular vent is just coming out. So we want to make sure that all these properties have good, this is an easy fix, right? So we really have to walk around these properties and say, okay, what holes can I close around the building and how do I do it? And again, here's another example, a nice big gap with some vegetation, stuff around it. You can actually see on the right-hand side, some wood or metal is up, against that building, providing that animal a good hiding area to move around. So you can actually stick your hand underneath it, right? So really important to get a good door sweep here. None of that, I mean, you're just asking for these animals to come in when you have situations like this. So again, we talked a lot about how to get in, right? We talked about door frames, garage doors, holes, all really somewhat easy fixes. Another thing that happens here regularly is these animals, these rodents will come in around the roof, right? So make sure that you're working with your customer, you're looking at that building where the roof comes down, make sure everything is tightly sealed so these animals don't come in. All right, so look, we talked about at the very beginning, you have to look at rodent infestations holistically. You cannot look at it only outside or only inside. You have to look at the entire package. And so when you're outside, what are you looking for? All right, food, water, harborage. Let's go back to those three. So with water, those leaky faucets, the pipes, the bird baths, right? Containers holding rainwater. Right. Not only for water source for the rodent, but also because of mosquitoes, right? Once every week, you need to be walking around that property, take 10 minutes, and flip everything over, get rid of what you don't need. It provides a lot of harborage and conducive conditions for these animals. When it comes to the food sources, I want you to look at the gardens. There's edible flowers and vegetables, fruit and nut trees, the bird food, right? Pet food in your trash can. So all these things that potentially could be providing food for these animals. Yes, they will eat slugs and snails and everything else, okay? But let's just remove the obvious, easy things. And when it comes to harborage, debris, if you have a raised house, make sure that it's nice and clear underneath, right? Overgrown yards, trash piles. It's easy to just throw stuff on the side of the house. I'm going to get to it, right? And then a year goes by and that stuff is still there. So those are areas that are very conducive. And sheds, we get lots of examples where sheds become infested with rodents. So when you think about your yard, right, of course, we're all for flowers and vegetation and everything makes it beautiful. But if you have a vegetable garden or you have fruit trees, it's very important to pick your fruit when it's ripe, remove it so it's not on the ground when it falls. When the vegetables are ripe, take it as well, right? Don't leave anything on the ground. Bird feeders will attract rodents, all right? So I love birds, but you really have to sort of assess the situation because you're potentially feeding these rats as well. You have to collect, right? So try to avoid, if you are going to feed those birds, avoid overfeeding. Make sure you're cleaning up that excess bird food, for example, sunflower seeds or whatever seeds that are there. Clean that up so it's not just easy picking for these animals. Another issue we have here is also sometimes people keep chickens, hens, right, in their yards. Please make sure that you look at your local code and follow the, code directions. But it's really important, right, that you keep things as absolute tidy as possible because these chickens will often throw seed and everything around and it becomes a big issue with rodents. So very, very important to be very meticulous if you are going to keep chickens. And so when you're, again, inspecting the property, but we need to look at the outside. And so in this particular case on the left-hand side, right, you have trees that have nuts. You've got a bird feeder in the back with the second arrow. On the right-hand side, you've got a bird feeder you can see, but also a bird bath, right, providing that water. And it looks like that water has been there for a while. There's lots of leaves. It's got some tannins, things like that. But make sure that it's clean. You're removing that water source, of course, also because of mosquitoes. So in this particular situation, right, you've got a citrus tree, you've got a garden, you've got stuff next to the house, you've got a bird feeder. So it's all of these conducive conditions that you potentially could be attracting these animals to your house. And then also, providing essentially easy access into the structure as long as those openings are there. And so, again, lots of issues here, just on the ground with buckets and water and a tire. You've got vegetables that are overripe that needed to be removed. You've got some damage to the property, so it's gaining access potentially to the attic. Air conditioners, like window units, right? That's a big issue here in New Orleans. We have a lot of older homes. A lot of people have window units. So make sure that it is very tightly sealed, because that's an area that they could easily go up a pipe, walk across, boom, they're in that property. Chickens, right? So we all love chickens, but honestly, they can provide such huge issues when it comes to rodents, right? Rodent-related problems. If you look at this particular hen house here, you've got a roof that is off, and so you have easy access. The holes are open, essentially, they're very wide. Something to consider is if you're closing up with screening material, metal screening, use the 1/4-inch holes. Keep that tight roof, right, on this particular structure so that you're keeping out these animals. And please don't forget to go in, keep it tidy, remove that excess food so you're eliminating or at least reducing that food source for these animals. Again, you can sort of look at where sort of the perspective where it is in the yard, right underneath some trees. And so here in this metro area, we have not only Norway rats, but we also have roof rats. And roof rats will feed on the nuts, the flowers, the insects, the slugs, and all of that that's there. So again, having those chickens right underneath is really not a great idea, because essentially you're also providing cover and really gaining access, right? In addition to removing some of that clutter that is there, so that they're not hiding out. You may have Norway rats that could be burrowing as well in there and holding that water. So anyway, so I think we've kind of talked a lot about the chicken houses, right? So, but just make sure that, again, the water that's there, the food, all of these conducive conditions that are created when you have chickens in your yard. So lots of citrus here, right? So fine, I have a citrus tree in my yard as well, but when they are ripe, I take them. And so very important, you need to be really aware. We've seen situations where roof rats have come in and eaten the rind of lemons, or even some of these satsumas in this particular case. So really need to pay attention to what is happening in your own yard. Here's an example of some fruit had fallen, citrus as well, on the ground, not only for rodents, but your possums and your raccoons and other animals. This becomes a food source. All right, so here, this looks like it might almost be grapefruit, right? So you've got a tarp that potentially is holding water, lots of containers, weak points, of course, with tarps over the building. You can see that on the left-hand side. So very important to look at things holistically as you're trying to diagnose where the rodents may be feeding. Again, here you have a citrus tree almost next to the house. This is no distance at all for these animals to jump across, feed on. So again, super important that things are nice and tight, remove that fruit, and hopefully not plant it even so close to that property. So with this, I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Timmy, and he's going to talk a lot about the outside. So let me go ahead and stop sharing.
Okay, thank you, Claudia. Am I sharing now?
I don't think.
Are you seeing my screen or no? I'll try again. Share. Did it work this time?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Let's jump right into this. So we're not just talking about pest proofing extends beyond just fixing holes in buildings. It's also habitat modification, as Claudia's been talking about, fixing things in yards and issues like that. We'll start with a nice picture because I love to start with pictures. Guys, this is a common occurrence in South Louisiana. This is an open drainage ditch that holds water pretty much year round because we get a lot of rain, or it could be from a broken pipe under the ground or something like that. But these become frequent, very often frequented water sources for these rodents. It's if you can't solve this problem, which sometimes, like I said, if it's an underground pipe and you don't have access, notify your local utility company. They might not be aware that there's a break in a line there. And sometimes also it's not water coming out these pipes. Sometimes it's raw sewage, which rats do eat feces and they do eat some of the other items that could have been flushed down a toilet. So we need to be aware of this. And this is also a mosquito breeding issue. So this goes beyond this. This is a general pest machine. It's good for roaches, ants, mosquitoes, rats, and mice, and etc. So we need to be aware of this and check your storm drains too. See if they're holding water. Like I said, pest proofing should be beyond just sealing envelopes on buildings. It's also about habitat modification and problem solving in general. So let's watch a little video real quick. And this is going to lead into our next section. This is one of my favorites. Isn't she cute? Okay, we're gonna watch this more than once too, because that was a little house mouse, and we see what she's doing. Okay, and they say a picture says 1,000 words. Well, this video is writing us a novel. So if we watch real close, what was the first thing we did? And I know we've already talked about how they're able to get in these little holes because the head's the same width as the shoulders, and we talked about the size a quarter of an inch for a mouse and a half inch for a rat. Well, that little mouse, and we'll watch it one more time while I'm rambling. She watch what she does first. She takes a bite out to make the hole bigger so she could fit through the ceiling tile because she gorged herself so much beforehand when she was out foraging for the night that she can't fit back through the hole she came through originally. So that's just going to show that their skeletons are definitely rigid. But beyond that, we're looking at look, what are we seeing in this? We're seeing a drop ceiling where it intersects with a hollow block wall. Uh, so drop ceilings, that's an area we overlook a lot. I think we talked about that already in our inspection webinar. And the hollow blocks we had mentioned too. But hollow blocks on buildings become rat and mouse condos a lot of times because they're not backfilled. We're going to look at a couple of pictures of that too that adds into this. But also, this is about behavior because what's she doing? She's at the top of a roof line at the top shelf going up. And I've often heard this myth that mice don't climb. That's just rats. They'll climb. Mice don't really want to climb that much. Well, she didn't hear this myth because she's happily climbing up this, and that's a coax cable like we plug in our TVs to get, cable television and so, etc. And she climbed right up and into the ceiling. And when you went into the drop ceiling, she wasn't nesting in a drop ceiling. She was nesting in those blocks behind there. So from there, they're excellent climbers, mice and rats. There's no exception. Even Norways, for as big and bulky as they are amazing climbers as well. So these are things not to overlook when we're looking for our entry points. We cannot forget to look up. That is something where we've trained ourselves as an industry to look at the corners and always be looking down for rodents. Well, if you're working with roof rats or if you're working in general with rodents, you need to look up more often. So we need to look at it from the rodent's point of view. They're not seeing pipes and wires and branches and so, well, I guess they are seeing branches, but they're not seeing pipes and wires and chases and things like that. No, they're seeing branches and vines. They're seeing it from a jungle or forest point of view, not from an urban point of view. They see the urban jungle, if you would. So let's look at it like that when we're doing our control methods and looking for our entry points. Look at it from the point of view of if I were an animal living out in the wild and looking at this situation, how would I approach it? So here's a great one. This is a typical thing. I could have taken this picture in so many different places, but that is an AC line right there that runs water up to the AC line and it's got insulation on it. A lot of times the rats will come and rip the insulation off and they'll chew little pinholes to get water. But in this situation, they were using it to access to get in the attic of this structure. So, and if we look close at the pipe there too, you can notice all the marks on it. Those little pock marks on there from where the paint has been removed, those are actually claw marks from where climbing up and down, they've ripped away some of that pipe material over the years. So really cool. When you're out doing your inspections and looking for stuff like this, start looking at your pipes. And if they have insulation, look for those punctures and those pock marks and scratch marks and claw marks. It's a really good hint if the area is active and if you should be putting, focusing control methods on that area. So this is looking from the inside. So I went inside the building and looked from the other point of view, and that's daylight shining through bright and clear. Uh, now, the road to hell's paved with good intentions because we're going to watch what the homeowner did for their good intentions. They sealed it with expanding foam. Guys, Please do not use expanding foam. And you see that's a big male Norway looking down there, and he's staring at the foam, and you know what he's thinking? I'm gonna go through that like a hot knife through butter. That is not gonna hold me back at all. And it's not. They do make some foam, some very good IPM foams on the market they're not foamy as much as they have a gumminess to them. So when the animal starts to chew, it gets caught in it and wants to stop. So there are some very specifically made IPM and rodent proofing and or what do they call them now? I want to say they call them like wildlife foams. So they're designed specifically for stuff like that, for situations like this to seal these holes. But that is the infamous yellow expanding foam, which the rats can have no problem going through. So when we do our pest proofing, we want to use the best materials that we can get our hands on, so we don't have to go back and do the job twice. Okay, I mentioned the hollow blocks, and this is what you're looking down when you see these hollow block constructions. You're looking down these holes and these voids. And when we look on the left-hand side, we can see the holes don't line up perfect, right? It almost creates a zigzag pattern. Well, if anyone's familiar with hollow block buildings or cinder block buildings, when you walk the exterior of them, a lot of times you're going to find spots with plumbing penetrations or where wires were run through at some point, or maybe somebody just somehow or another they were doing some construction in a yard or something, but they put a chip or a hole in there. And as we said, if the hole's like a half inch, hey, the rats are going to have no problem. If it's a quarter inch, the mice are going to have no problem. So once they get in there, they can run these little mazes through those hollow blocks and they can get access to our buildings and they'll line them with materials and such too, so they don't have to feel that cold brick against them. They'll use them to hoard food in, and they'll raise their entire families inside of these. So the other issue we run into with brick buildings are weep holes. Depending on what part of the country you're in, you may not be experienced with weep holes, or you may not have any idea what we're talking about. In fact, the part of the world you're in may determine whether or not you know what weep holes on a building are. But here in the South, in fact, in general, in areas with high humidity and pressure variance and pressure changes, we put these weep holes on buildings. It's to allow some of the moisture and airflow to come through our buildings. But the 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 measurements on these weep holes varies building to building. Sometimes they can be so small that you can't get your pinky through, and oftentimes they're like this. They're a nice, decent size. I could shove probably my entire index finger through there, which means to a mouse, that is no problem to enter the building. So, and when they get in through here, if you're familiar with what it looks like on the other side of there, usually it's a wall void. When they go through, they're going to hit open wall void or insulation or something like that. That's perfect. And also, as I mentioned, this is about airflow. So a lot of times these mice will be running along in winter and they'll feel that temperature variant or feel that airflow coming out, and that's what leads them in. And these are very easy to seal. I don't think my next picture has them sealed, but I'll tell you what to do. You can seal these with steel wool if you choose. If you use copper mesh, be very careful when using copper mesh for rodent proofing. If you're using it, the only spot I really recommend it is indoors. And then be careful what metals you're putting against each other, because a lot of times if you put the wrong metal against the wrong metal, you can cause a chemical reaction. Actually, it'll cause the metals to degrade faster or cause arcing issues or etc. I'm not I don't know what the term would be, but I'm not an expert when it comes to metals and exposures, but I do know enough to know that certain metals aren't supposed to touch each other. And copper is one of the metals that's very sensitive, but also when it gets wet, it bleeds that blue green. So I would never use it on the outside of building. Using the steel wool, it's not a bad idea here, but it's over time, it's going to degrade. It's going to rust and it's going to leave a rust patch behind, and then the rodents will be able to push it out or pull it out. No, here I like aluminum screen actually. And what I do is I like to cut them into cones or triangles. So I can easily shove it in, and then I'll have the ends coming out like that. And someone had this ingenious idea way before me, and you can buy these at Home Depot, pre-cut screens that fit into these weep holes on houses. Or you can go the easy route like I do and just buy yourself a roll of screen and cut them yourself. And it's good to cut them yourself because, as I mentioned earlier, the size of the weep holes does vary. Sometimes they're gigantic, sometimes they're tiny. So what are we looking at here? This is the outside of a building, right? And outside of a hollow block building. And earlier we were looking at I'm not going to go back to show you guys because we all remember that they didn't line up perfect. Well, in this building, they're lining up almost perfect, the holes. So can anybody guess? I know it's very hard to see what that bottom arrow is pointing to, but it would be a good guess if you guess rodent droppings. Specifically, those are mouse droppings at the bottom. And look up at the top point. That's a rub mark right there, a beautiful rub mark. And then count the bricks. So those bricks are approximately 12 inches tall. So when we start counting, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That these mice were growing 9 feet up from the ground to enter the structure because that was the closest hole in the seam where they could get in. And we are going to look at a close up, see the beautiful rub mark from the mice, and see what I did. That's what I mean by the aluminum screen. I cut aluminum screen and I shoved it in that gap, and that's enough. And I don't have to worry about the aluminum deteriorating. That and it's going to stay in there for a very good amount of time. And if I really wanted to be awesome about it, which the only reason I didn't do it that day is because I didn't have it with me. You can even apply patching on this concrete patch or sealant sometimes. Now, being at the angle, which we'll see on a corner like that, it is really hard to get good sealant in a situation like that. But it's not impossible. Practice makes perfect, and a lot of times we can use that mesh, that screen material that we put in there, sort of like rebar, to hold in the concrete or the sealant material that we're putting in here. But as Claudia mentioned too, we do a lot of triage pest control like this. So this is Band-Aids on bullet wounds, temporary solutions to permanent problems. This is me sealing up more of the gap because as I went down the wall or went up the wall further too, I noticed further gaps. So once I sealed that one hole, what's to keep them from climbing up higher? There's no rule that says mice are only going to climb 9 feet because mice will climb much higher than 9 feet if that's what's required to enter the structure. So sometimes we're going to have to keep going beyond that. Just because you seal the first hole doesn't mean you're done. You have to keep going and seal all the holes. I mentioned a second ago too, areas where it's very difficult to seal stuff properly. When you're dealing with a straight wall like this, and we can tell both holes are active, but obviously the hole on the right with all the nice rub marks on it and sebum all there, that is the most obvious hole on this, where most of our activity is occurring. Now, I've patched this hole at this point in my career probably close to 50 or so times, if not more. This is a building I frequent a lot for rodent issues. In fact, I was there earlier today. And the problem is, yes, I can get concrete to sit in this hole sometimes, and I've tried to mesh and tried to get it to hold in. The problem is the activity here is so fierce. The concrete doesn't have time to cure properly, and the rodents are able to either chew through or push their way through sometimes. So in some situations, this is going to require me to think more about it and figure this out. And like I said, I've been working on this problem for years and I have yet to come up with a really good solution. I've tried many of the expanding foams and things like that. And in the end, the rats always beat me at this site. Sometimes it's tough. I like to lay it out to everybody honestly. Pest proofing and rodent work is not always easy. So we're going to watch a video of me under a house talking about escutcheon plates and pipe penetrations. So enjoy. Let's see if my volume's working. Points where rodents often enter your homes if you have a raised home. And the issue is a lot of these plumbing pipes, when they come in, they leave multiple holes that are more than large enough to allow these rodents in. Now remember, with a half-inch gap, a rat can fit in. With a quarter-inch gap, a mouse can fit in. So now, there are more permanent solutions to this, but a temporary solution is going to be to take steel wool and you wad it up and you shove it in these holes. And this is going to prevent the rodents from chewing through and from getting through these holes. Now, this is just a temporary fix to a permanent problem. This is really just the sheer minimum. Personally, you can go through and do more stuff, like you can get wood cut to the exact specifications of this hole to fit flush with this, and then you could screw it in the tack along the sides here. You could get a piece of metal flashing if you know how to cut metal, or get somebody to cut some metal for you and put that there. That would be a permanent solution. If you look over on these pipes, you're going to see yellow, orange expanding foam here, but it comes in yellow and some other colors. We do not recommend the use of expanding foam to seal gaps for rodents. It is great for sealing out temperatures and airflow and insects, but it is lousy for rodents actually. They will chew through that like a hot knife through butter. They will have no problem entering this. So really, when you seal that, like I said, you want to think of permanent solutions for sealing. Wood, metal, something like that. You could even get hardware cloth, which is a gauge of cloth. We'll have some examples in one of our other videos, but it's easily to tack up. You could use staples or nails or something like that to tack these up. Now, you're going to want to put as much steel wool in these holes as you can, okay? But you're also not going to want to leave any hanging out. Okay, push it in like that and try and get it all. Because if you leave little bits hanging out, just enough for that rodent to grab on with its teeth, sometimes they can pull it out or they can use their claws. So the more you push it in there and the better it's pushed in, like I said, that's a little too much. I think that's perfect right now. Uh, that'll work well. And you go through and you're gonna have to seal all these little holes. So there's a lot of holes under a raised house, be it where wires penetrate or pipes. So you might be at this. And now I'm gonna be realistic about this, guys. Not everybody's able to get under houses. Some of the houses are tight crawls, some of them are just totally inaccessible, or we just aren't physically able to get the work done. If you're not able to do this, you can easily seal from the inside as well, which a lot of times is easier to get to these, but sometimes we have appliances in the way that are unmovable, or a sink in the way, or something that we can't get to that entry point. And if you can't do it yourself, you might have to hire a handyman or see if your pest control company actually would offer that service for pest proofing on your structure. But if you can get at it yourself, it is an easy fix, and it's something that's going to be required, especially with house mice coming in through this and rats coming in on your pipes. Uh, so, guys, we're going to move on to another section of the house now and start looking at other things that are going to have to be patched. Okay, so with that, let's get back under our house with some cool pictures, right? Uh, isn't this awesome? I'd mentioned earlier about seeing the world through the rodent's point of view. If you were a rat and you were under a house looking at this, you're seeing, maybe a cave with some vines running through it or something like that. You're not seeing pipes and things like this. But okay, as rodent control people, when we look at this, what stands out the most in this picture? Which penetrations would you focus on the most? And I'm not saying that some could be ignored because they all should be addressed, but there's one pipe that just says Rat Highway. If you guys haven't noticed yet, it's that one running across with all the sebum on top. If we look at the two pipes further back in the picture, the two white pipes on the back running side by side to each other, there's barely anything on them. Dust, or it's just a little dust. There's no real gunk and grime. And then we look at that front pipe cutting at the angle with the two kick-ups that go upward right there. And that is just disgusting with sebum. It is beautiful. It is telling us exactly where we need to zip tie traps, where we need to zip tie stations, and also we need to follow these pipes to where they're penetrating, because that's where these rodents are entering the building at. They're showing us exactly which pipes are their super highways. So use these things to your advantage. If you've paid attention to our other webinars we've given, we talked about the clues they leave behind. Well, these animals are showing us now where to pest proof, and they're also showing us their travel routes, which, it's tough to keep them from traveling on pipes. So instead, use it against them. Use that as an opportunity for a spot to put out control devices. Pipe penetrations, as I mentioned and showed, it's about shoving that steel wool in and getting the right proportion of it. Not too much, not too little, just right. And as I said, this is not a permanent solution, but it is the beginning of it. I often put that down and then follow up with concrete on top of it. And here we go. Here's a good example of that. We show, and this is something to concrete work is something that takes practice. There's an art to it, because I'm not a mason, but over the years of doing this, I've learned a lot of little tricks and tips and neat little things. But they're really hard to teach via a webinar. It's the kind of thing where you have to watch in person. So hey, come to one of our academies. We will teach you in person how to do some concrete work. But in the end, when you do it, this is how it should look. It should be smoothed out. And yes, this does look kind of ugly and nasty, but once it dries, you can come back with paint and paint over it and it looks beautiful. And you can't tell that the patch job was even done. So like I said, it's looking for, yes, sometimes the patchwork we do is messy, but can it be cleaned up afterwards? Can you make it look nicer afterwards? And also, is it effective? These are things, who cares if it's not effective? So let's talk for a brief moment about one of my favorite true rat myths, that rodents enter structures through toilets, because we got a video for this one. For anyone who might not know, that is what's called a sewer clean out. This is in a basement, and we knew that the rat was coming up through the toilet already, so I followed the pipes down to the basement. And that's where I found this clean out here, where I put my camera at, and I was able to watch this rat and see how she was coming in and out every night. And I even got to figure out what time she came by every night, because she was on a schedule. But this is a fix where you see my trap there. In the end, we didn't need traps to solve this problem. In the end, this is what we needed. Here's what it looked like during the day with the lights on instead of with my camera. Uh, all we needed was that red plug you see there. That solved this problem. We did not throw rodenticides at this problem. We did not waste time out throwing out traps and trying to catch this animal. No, we timed out when it was going to be gone. We came when we knew the animal left and saw on camera she was gone, and then we closed the hole. And if anybody's thinking, well, what's stopping her from swimming up the toilet? This was a basement. This rat was entering through a second floor toilet. It could, while rats are amazing swimmers and able to hold their breath for a good amount of time, even they aren't able to make that distance from the sewer through the basement to the first floor to come up through the second floor toilet. It was just impossible for the animal. So we never had an incident with this again. So this is pest proofing now. This is about good inspections. It's about problem solving, and it's about doing the job right instead of just, throwing poison at an issue. Other methods for sewer cleanouts, if you can't get the plug or if you can't get the right size plug, and in this situation, this required a screw-in plug, or if you need access to the sewer cleanout. Let's say this is a building where you get clogs in your sewer line often. And I know we're not plumbers, but if your plumber's having this issue where he needs to access for some reason at sewer cleanout, you can make one of these with hardware cloth and what's known as a pipe collar right there. They're very easy to make. You just bend it over, put the pipe collar around, and tighten it up. And you now have an easily removable screen that prevents rodents from using it as a travel and entry point in the houses while still giving you access to be able to see in and, if necessary, do maintenance. So think out the box sometimes with your pest proofing. Make it work for you. Okay, this is one of my favorites. This is one of the first pictures I took when I got to the city, actually, under one of the first houses I inspected. And the poor little old lady had no idea how the rats were getting in her house. And this is another sewer clean out, only this is the entire sewer line has now rusted. That's galvanized. And yes, rats can go through galvanized over time, especially when it's rusty. And that's what these animals eventually did, to the point where they exploited something that was occurring naturally where the galvanized was rusting and getting weak, and they just busted the heck out of it to make it a super highway. Is there a way to pest proof this? No, there isn't. This is a time where we need to admit that we can't handle a situation this big. This is time for them to call a plumber. Because I don't know how to replace a sewer line, but in this situation, that's what's necessary. Even a band-aid and a bullet wound isn't going to solve this one. So sometimes we have to swallow our pride and admit that the problem's bigger than what we can solve. And in this situation, if you don't address this, you're going to be killing rats the rest of your life at this house. So, and I won't hype on this because Claudia mentioned this earlier too. Sealants versus caulk. Please use sealants. Like I said, they shrink and expand with the temperatures. They're a little more gummy, so when the rats try and chew in them, they can't get a good pull on it, and they don't like chewing on that gumminess. So it holds up much longer. It's easier to paint over. There are multiple benefits to it. Yes, it's the price difference is a couple of dollars more, but it's not enough to justify using an inferior product that you know is going to fail. So if you're going to do pest proofing in your ceiling areas, please go for the sealants versus the caulk. And whether it's silicone sealants or silicone caulk, once again, it's in the word caulk versus sealant. Both of them are made with silicone, but they have different inert ingredients in the sealant versus the caulk, and that's where the real difference is. So sealing airflow is huge. And shout out to LJ, miss you every day. This is our old handyman sealing something up for us. And it's funny, this actually was a possum issue, but hey, if the possum could get in, what's to stop the rats from getting in, right? But this was about sealing up airflow because these animals could smell in there, and they could smell food inside the building. They could feel the warmth in winter, so they wanted into the structure. So when you're using sealants, it's more about sealing in the odors in the air, and like I said, in those temperatures and things. It's things that are drawing the animals to the house to begin with, so they don't start chewing your door frames and chewing your window frames. And it's very tedious work doing pest proofing, especially things like sealing airflow, but it's worth it. It is worth the effort you put in. You need to be nitpicking because we're trying to seal air out. So, air is pretty small and it gets in cracks and crevices that even mice can't. So it's very important to seal it up. Oh, window frames. And I love this one too, because now we see where it's ripped, where the rats can come in and out easy. And that's saying that there's a way in and out around this, or they can chew into the window frame. But when we look even closer in the picture, you can see the years of paper wasp nests. So this is also providing another pest issue. But we need to make sure that our frames on our window or screens on our windows are secure and not ripped and not they don't have holes like this. We look closer, or sorry, we move to what materials to use. Galvanized mesh is okay. Aluminum mesh is okay. The thing I would not recommend, which a lot of people are going to now, the cloth screens on windows and screen doors and screen porches. That cloth will not hold rats out at all. Will not hold mice out at all. They will chew through it very quickly. So if we're trying to keep these animals out, think metal. Do not go cloth, even though it's cheaper and looks nice. What looks nice isn't always effective with rodents. And Claudia brought up the window units earlier too, but she forgot to mention one little thing. The other issue with the window units I have, and I said pest proofing isn't just about sealing buildings, it's also about habitat modification. Think about the AC units when they're running in summer. What's underneath it? A pool of fresh, cold water that comes dripping out of these things, and usually puddles underneath because, at least where we're at, your AC is probably running almost 9 months out of the year. So you end up with these puddles of water underneath, and rats come running to them, mice come running to them, possums and raccoons will come running too, and they will go, "Oh my God, fresh water," especially in the middle of summer and it's cold. So find a way to drain that so you don't get pooling in those issues. Make sure there's no buckets underneath it, or God help you, no used tires or anything like that. Nothing to catch that water and hold it in so it becomes an insect issue beyond a rodent issue too. But also, she had mentioned sealing up these windows with the window units in them. See, behind this window unit, I could shove my entire hand. So this isn't just a mouse issue. If my hand's fitting behind there, that is a rodent issue in general. That means rats or mice, Norways or roof rats or house mice, will have no problem going up and through this window. How do you seal it? That's easy. You could go with the steel wool option, like we said, or personally, I like permanent. I would get a piece of wood, cut it to fit, and shove it in there, and seal it up, nail it from the other side if you have to, screw it in with a screw gun. There are multiple methods for doing this that will almost permanently, if not long term, solve this issue if they're entering through here. But overlooking it isn't going to solve anything. And if you use what they gave you when you bought the AC unit, it's usually this foam insulation stuff, which is great for keeping out insects and keeping out, the hot and cold temperatures, but it's lousy for keeping out rodents. They have no problem going through it. Replace missing siding on buildings. And I love this picture. Credit where credit's due. This is my colleague Phil's picture. And it is great because look at those raccoons just hanging out middle of the day. What's to say this picture could have been taken? It could have been rats hanging out. But if you have an issue with openings on your building large enough to allow raccoons in, then you definitely have mice and rats coming in those openings as well. And this is one of those things too, where siding requires a bit of expertise. If you don't feel comfortable doing it, hire a contractor, sub the work out. I tell a lot of companies too, find a guy, a handyman, hire him, make his only job exclusion and pest proofing. Uh, it's easier than you think, and it's worth every penny because these guys are just turn out to be some of the best employees sometimes and really good at and thinking out the box and sealing these holes. But I don't know how to replace siding, but I can learn quick. And the internet is a valuable resource. There are a lot of great how-to videos on YouTube that can show you how to replace things like this and how to do this. But it is necessary that you address this. Letting raccoons live in your attic that freely, it's a matter of time before the issue gets really out of hand. Again, sealing siding, this is fascia and soffit issues, where if this is left open, it could snowball. This could start not with rodents. This could start with birds, with starlings or grackles or house sparrows nesting inside of these voids. Because a lot of times, all three of those species will nest in those voids, especially the house sparrows. And guess what rodents really like? We talked earlier about them loving chickens. Well, they love eggs in general. So they'll come looking for those baby birds and they'll eat the baby birds out the nest and they'll eat the eggs if they're there. And they'll eat mom and dad bird if they can get their little jaws and their little claws on them. So another reason to seal it up is not just to keep the rodents out, but to keep the other animals that are drawing the rodents in as well. Oh, one of those infamous AC lines going in. Tough to seal, but not impossible. There's no rules saying you cannot apply an escutcheon plate. As we had mentioned earlier, escutcheon plates are the kind that hook underneath your bathroom cabinet to where the pipe penetrations come through. You can put those on an AC line at the roof line, and they work equally as well. In fact, they're very effective like that. So think about that. You're putting a metal plate to seal that hole. That is a permanent seal. So But even if you sealed that AC line there, you still have to worry about where that soffit's hanging off right there. And if you don't deal with that soffit area, the roads are just going to go right around there. Who cares if you sealed the AC line when you left another gap open right there? So it's looking at everything, not just solving the initial problem, but solving the next problem too. Thinking, okay, so this is their main entryway. They're coming up this AC line. What's going to happen when I close it? What are the other entry points? So look at everything all together. And I harp on this a lot when I do these presentations. Be a detective. Look closer at things. So I go at this house and the people are telling me they have no idea how the mice are getting in. They just don't know. And this is a vent on side of their garage. And this was easy enough to walk by and see this little Tom and Jerry textbook hole where they've chewed through. And when you look close, you can even see a couple of hairs, I want to say, sticking out on the edge where the rodents have been pushing through. It's not as active as it could be because we don't have a good sebum mark, but it is active enough so that they chew their way in. They're leaving some furs behind. So get the metal vents is what I'm getting at with this, I guess. Get a wooden vent. If you go, you get what you pay for. When you buy cheap plastic things, sometimes rodents are going to go through them. That's what they do for a living. So, oh, and Claudia had mentioned the overgrown vegetation. Okay, it's not just about giving them access. We're also giving them harborage in a lot of these situations. And also, as these plants are growing, they're destroying the building. They're creating more cracks and crevices as they grow because these roots of these plants and the branches and things like that will grow into the building actually and grow through little micro cracks in the brick and make those micro cracks larger and larger over time till the entire structure starts to deteriorate. But this is just a perfect example because we have that nice pipe chase right there where we can imagine the rats. And yes, this is the same building that the rat was pulling the wire on. These pictures were taken at. And this is how the animals, they were not only accessing the building through there, they were living inside those vines. It was a perfect little area where they're away from predators. The vines were so thick they could build nests above ground in them. It was just ideal. And then in summer, some of the vines actually produced fruits and flowers that the rodents were feeding on. Oh my goodness. So this nice little shed, Claudia had mentioned sheds that get overlooked a lot of times. This is less than 3 feet from the initial structure that was calling in the complaint. And then we have this tree growing out the side of the shed. And if anybody knows their plants and trees, that is an elderberry bush. So that time of year, there were no berries. But come summer, when those berries are up on that bush and they're ripe, or even when it's just flowering, roof rats and Norway rats both will go nuts for those berries sometimes, as well as raccoons and possums. And look how close it is. It is literally touching the roof line of both structures. It is touching the window of one structure of the dilapidated shed there in the picture. So, and yes, there were rats living in the shed and they were using that tree to access the house. And from there, they were actually coming in through the chimney because there was a break in the bricks in this building. So it just goes to show, yes, I was able to identify that they were coming through the chimney, but little good did that do me if I couldn't figure out how they were getting in the chimney. I just knew they were coming out of the chimney. And still to this day, I was never able to access and find the exact hole, but I was able to make it so that these animals were no longer able to access the roof. The shed was torn down by this citizen, and those trees were cut down. So now the rodents don't have a way to access their initial entry point. So sometimes pest proofing is removal and cleanup. It's actually it's it always I love it the way sanitation always ties in. Sanitation is the key to rodent control. So looking at this vegetation again, and oh my goodness, we look at the picture on the left, and that's a perfect storm waiting to happen for rodents. We've got the vines leading in the top, but look closer, and I love the details and pictures. That's an AC unit on top of this structure, which means the rodents have a water source on top of the structure too, which also means if the AC unit's water source or drainage gets blocked, what's going to happen? The water will leak on the roof and cause weak spots on the roof too. So you might have termite issues. You might get pooling that causes mosquito issues. You're going to have weakness in the wood and such, and probably weakness in the concrete too, depending how well it's cured. And then the rodents will exploit this and be able to enter the building. When we look at the picture on the right, we see how can you even do an inspection on a building like this? How am I supposed to fit between the fence and the building when all that vegetation and that vegetation is growing over 1.5 feet off the fence? That's how long and how how long and thick those vines have been growing there, that they've grown in a mass over 1.5 feet of thickness. Now, since I can't take this picture anymore, this fence line has been cleaned up and all the vegetation. But as I mentioned earlier, this was another situation where, and these weren't roof rats, these were Norway rats living above the ground in those vines. They carried everything they needed up and built their nests in there. And they had no problem with the fact that they had made above ground burrow systems basically in these vines on these fences. So, and this is an issue. This is pest proofing, is habitat modification. We had to remove those vines to get control of the situation. It was necessary. So our strategies, we've gone over most of these already through our presentations through the weeks. And as I said, this one has been pretty much focused on exclusion, pest proofing, rodent proofing in general. I think that's where we're wrapping up. So I'm going to cut back over and turn this back over to Claudia Anastasi.
Okay, I do see a few questions in the chat. Remember, if you have any questions to ask, you can type them in the chat. The first question is, will mixing steel wool into expanding foam work around a pipe where it enters the wall?
Okay, great question. It's not a bad idea. It's a temporary solution to a permanent problem. My biggest issue over the years with this method has become those animals have that sebum on them, and they often urinate and defecate as they're moving around too. So the foam tends to hold pathogens really well and hold scent really well, and it's very absorbent. So that's my bigger issue with it, beyond just the fact that they go through it. But that's not a bad idea. We used to teach that a lot. Use it sort of like rebar to hold it in, and I still tell people to do that. But I would do that as a temporary fix if I was, don't look at that as permanent because they will go through it. And also, that steel wool or even copper wool will break down even and deteriorate even inside the expanding foam. So it's going to rust and eventually it'll give. So it is a solution, but it's a temporary solution. And you still run disease issues. So hope that helps.
Okay, the next question is, will rats eat or chew PEX water pipes?
Yes, they will. PEX water pipes or the PX. It's not as common as the other pipes, but they will if they're dying of thirst. Like, as we said earlier, it takes stainless or titanium at this point to hold back rodents if they want to get into something. There's not many metals through time and through effort. They won't just they will repeatedly go back and chew until they get what they want. And if they're dying of thirst, you know, they will do amazing things. But no, that pipe won't hold up permanently if they wanted. But it
So
is
this is
better than the copper alternative. Sorry, go ahead, Claudia.
that's okay. It's a little bit different because the piping is complete, the tubes are completely different. But we
Yeah.
have seen in restaurants in where you've got soda machines where actually the rodents chew through those lines. Now it's completely different than the PEX, okay? But still, when they want to get into these tubings to get either water, moisture or food source or whatever it is, they will go through it.
Okay, that's all the questions I see in the chat. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Our next webinar will be on Thursday, March the 2nd, and we'll be talking about the importance of rodent management. As always, you can follow us on our social media for updates and tips on rodents, mosquitoes, and termites. And once again, I just want to thank everyone for attending. Y'all have a great evening.